Morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. This is web tips for WinShuttle from Clear Process Solutions, and I'm Jeff Dunn. Today we're going to talk about, just a little bit of logistics first. Everybody should be on mute, and if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat window. We'll cover those questions at the end. So I'm Jeff Dunn. I've been working with SAP for about 13 years, and most of that with Winshuttle, especially transaction and query. And in fact, we're going to be talking about journal entries today, and that was the first Winshuttle script that I wrote in the beginning there. So. And then we heavily used, at my previous company, we heavily used Winshuttle for SAP conversions, moving data from legacy systems. So this topic will be creating journal entries using Winshuttle Studio. So there's kind of three steps here. We're going to record the script for the journal entry transaction, and before you record any Winshuttle script, really, you should kind of go into SAP and plan out the navigation of the transaction and how you will use it. And then you can start recording from Winshuttle Studio. So that's step one. So I've sort of pre-recorded some of these steps just to make sure that everything's going to work fine. So we're going to play one of those videos. Sorry about that. Okay. So if you open up Studio, you would say New on the menu, and then Transaction, and we're going to create a new recording. Here you would type in your transaction code that you would use in SAP, and you can leave the rest as the default recording mode. So apologize, our recipe is a little bit slow, but so this is, we're using FB01 for this journal entry. There's a bunch of different journal entry transaction codes. FB50 is another common one. The advantage of this one, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, you enter one line at a time, versus FB50 would have a grid showing you all the items at once, and you would have to add a new row to the grid or the table and then enter the data into the tab. So this is a little cleaner for working with Winshuttle. You just put your posting key and your account number into the GL account number into that first row there, and hit enter after you've done all the header data you see above. On the next screen, we're going to put in the amount and the cost center or item text and some other things there that we could work with. And then you would select the More button to get to the additional fields that are not shown. In this case, Profit Center. What you would want to do is a couple of lines in the journal entry that represent all the possible fields that you would need to use, because some field or some GL accounts will not show a profit center or whatever, you know, or a tax code or something that may be specific to a debit or a credit. So you want to make sure you get a couple of items in there. You need at least two to be able to create the journal entry anyway, to have a credit and a debit. So this is the second item. And again, we're going to go to more, and we're not going to enter the profit center, but we'll just by going to that screen, we'll be able to map to that. Okay, so when we hit the save button at the top, it should be creating the journal entry. That's what you would normally do in SAP. And in the background, Winshuttle is building out the columns that need to be mapped. So that's the document number that was created in the test. So, we'll just switch back to PowerPoint while we're waiting on that. So the next step would be to review the script and map the fields. You're just going to review the script to see what fields and screens were pulled in. Make sure you're not missing anything. And then we're going to build a loop around the detail, the second line, because you could have up to 1,000 lines total. So the first line is going to be entered on the header page, and then the other lines will be in a loop. So let's go ahead and look at that. See how our video is here. Okay, so this is the script that came back in the basic view mode, and I think that's the end of that step. So let me, oops. Let's show the mapping step, which would be here. Okay, so if you go to the expert view tab, which is this right here under mapping, then you're going to see the screens and all the field names and additional information. The basic would just be the fields. So what we noticed here is that that the profit center didn't actually show up. So if you go back to the view tab, which is what we did here, and check disable fields, then we can see all of the fields on the screen, the screens that we went to. And so you can scroll down and find the profit center, which we knew was on the screen after the item text was entered. Each of these screens is indicated by the green bar here. So there were two lines, so I enabled profit center on both lines. And we can go back when we're done with that. We can uncheck the disabled fields box, and that will go back to just the activated fields, or just the fields that we enabled, either by entering data in them in SAP during the recording, or the adding them manually like we just did with the profit center. So so the next step is to make sure, one thing that we saw here is that the tax code was a field that was available on the second item, but not on the first item. Well, here we're actually mapping the header information. So let's do that first. So you can just left click, drag a field down to the spreadsheet and to create a mapping. On the run log, we dragged up from the spreadsheet because that's going to be, I'm sorry, the other way around. The run log we dragged down to the spreadsheet, and the other fields we're dragging which column we want to map to the field list. So this is where I noticed that the task code was on the second line, but not on the first line. And that's because the GL account on the first line did not have a task code available to it. So I copied that into the, you want to have all the same fields available on every line, and then we can just skip the ones that are not valid for that line. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. So now we're mapping the item details for the first line item, which was rows starting at row 13 there, down through row 25. And then the next screen starting at row 26 is going to be inside the loop because that's the second line item. So one thing I noticed is that the fields were the same and the screens were the same for the second line as the first line, which makes sense. So instead of having to map all of those again, you can just copy and paste those. So I selected the rows I want to copy to include the mapping that I'd already done, pasted it, and now we'll just get rid of the unmapped fields that are now duplicated. You could just go through and map each one and then say you want to preserve the previous mapping, if that is easier for you. So in this case, I'm removing those duplicate screens at the end. So now we need to create a loop around that second line item, which is those three screens from row 26 to row 41. We want the column H to be the header and detail indicator. So we select that there. Leave H and D as your default indicators for whether it's the header or the detail. And so that is it for the mapping. So we now have a mapping, just in the last step here, we're saving our file. We've created a new template and a new script that's currently mapped and ready to run. Okay, so let's get rid of the video here. So the third step is to test the script with some test data, and then confirm that the SAP document was created if we get that success message. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this live. So let's studio over here. Okay, so this is some test data. Let's just to show you that it's going to work, we're going to add a few more lines. Just to show you, you can use formulas in your amount fields or any of these other fields where based on lookups or formulas, you could do that. So we're going to enter one entry with the 40 posted key. And that's the credit posted key, and the others are the debits. So the cost center was only entered here. So one thing before we run it, the skip indicator is going to default to a slash. But in this case, you'd probably want to use the blank because you want it to skip anything that is not valid. For example, if profit center is not a valid field for this, then you probably want to just leave profit center column blank and then have the script skip that field if it's not filled in. Excuse me. So that's the one change that I need to make here, and then we're ready to test. So I'm going to test this data, which you can see from the drop down. The default is to start at row 2 and run till the end, everywhere it sees the D and the column H. So this will take a minute or so. So one nice thing about this is there's a lot of different journal entry transactions. You could actually create multiple scripts that are mapped to the same template format. And a lot of times the fields are the same, the screens are the same, so you can kind of copy between scripts, Winshuttle scripts. The way I did the task code and the way I did the copying the first line down to the second line for the mapping. So that's a handy way to do. I was going to show you one more script after this that you can use to park a document instead of posting it. And you can use the same templates, just slightly different field names and screen names. So they should be getting the result back here. Okay, so this document was created. I'm just going to copy that number. So if we go to SAP, I know that is document 1000, and it should be fiscal year right now. Okay, so it created 7 lines like we expected. I put cost center on the first one. That's the only one that we entered. And then each one of these should have item text, a unique item text. So that all seemed to work. If there was any data entered in profit center or whatever, it would show up here. So that was successful. So let me just pull up the so this is FBV1. So we were working with FB01, which is posting a GL document. This is FBV1, which is to park a document. So if you look at the mapping and compared, they're very similar. The mapping is almost identical except for, I think, a screen name. So this, in these green bars, there's a screen name, but all the field names are the same. So we can sort of keep the same mapping and map to the same document that we had. So I didn't save the file that we just created, but just to do it again. So we had 7 rows, and we had an amount that was a sum function. So this could be the same document as what we just had, and if you run FBV1 against that data, we should get a parked document, which will be a new document number. Sorry, blocking the screen there. Okay, so we have another document that's now number 93. So instead of 89, it's now 90. Okay, so it is a parked document. It's got the same data as our posted document from earlier. So there's one thing I wanted to show you that there's that you run into sometimes with these journal entries is there's some editing options that sometimes can create issues or errors or whatever. So a couple that we found that you need to check or may need to check if you start to have issues is there's one here that would, if you didn't have it checked, which might be the default, it would copy the task code from the first line down to the second line. That may not be what you want because you may want to have a mix of with the task code and without a task code. And so you probably want to check that box and then have it pull from the spreadsheet whatever you put for the task code. So again, if the skip indicator is blank and you don't have any data in that field, it's just going to skip that field anyway. Also, this one, no company code proposal, that would, instead of defaulting to the last company code that was used or something, it would leave that blank and then again pull it from the spreadsheet from this column C. There's also a possibility that down here in these screen templates or layouts that you, if you have a template, if a user is using a template different than the one that's developing the script, than the user that's developing the script, then you could have some missing fields. You could be trying to, you could create a script that's mapped to a field that the user doesn't have on the screen. So sometimes you would want to check that and make sure that you're using a layout that includes all the fields that you need on that screen. So those are the main 3 things that you run into a lot. There's also some things about defaulting to currency and allowing an incomplete document to be parked or not. So that was in your FB01 screen, that's editing options. And you may have to instruct the users to change their options in order to be able to run your script. Okay, so that was testing, and now I think we're ready for questions. Let's see if anybody. Okay, so there's one question from AJ about advantages to using a multi-sheet header versus a single sheet. In this demo, we did a single sheet. The multi-sheet can be handy, but it gets a little complex. Sorry, let me get the spreadsheet open. If you did a multi-sheet, what you would do is you would put an ID over, you'd have a header sheet and a detail sheet. You'd put an ID here, let's say journal entry 1 or something. And then on the second tab, you would have the detail. It gets kind of tricky sometimes. Trying to remember. Not sure. I might have to get back to you on that, AJ. There's another option here that's cell-based mapping. That's it's under let's see, mapping here. If you change this to cell-based mapping, then you could have, instead of having header and detail rows, you would have all your header information at the top, and then you could start your detail on row 10 or whatever, and then it would just go to the end of the sheet. That gets a little tricky because in the mapping you would have to specify whether it's a header or a detail row, and the same thing actually for the multi-sheet. When you use a multi-sheet, you're going to point to either the header or the detail sheet, and it's going to have to keep track of which tab that you're mapped to. I guess the advantage of this is the advantage of using the table format instead of the column mapping instead of the cell based is that you can have multiple documents here. So you could have you could create another document starting with another H in this column, and then have the details for that document. So you could do 100 journal entries at once if you wanted in one list, and it would just step through each one, creating a document for each one, the way you saw the log message here. So I think that's all the questions we had. So let's get back to. So just a couple comments about events coming up right now. We have the main one I have listed here is the next WEBtips, which will be it's always the third Thursday, and this time October 17th. It's going to be on Winshuttle Composer. We sort of alternate between Composer and Studio. We like to do a mix of both. So that's the workflow or Composer. If you have any suggestions for WEBtip topics or things that you're interested in, we certainly want to hear those, and we like these to be relevant to what you're dealing with. So please send those to info@ClearProcessSolutions, and you can check out our events page on the website for other events or to register for the webinar or the WEBtip. All the WEBtips will be posted on our YouTube channel. And this next slide is about solution care. We have Winshuttle does some basic support maintenance, and we have sort of an advanced portfolio of support there that we can offer, and that's called Solution Care at CPS. So feel free to contact us about that. And again, this is Clear Process Solutions. We thank you for joining.